right, everyone, thanks for having us. I appreciate everybody's time. I know that there are people from all across the globe, clients of ours, industry leaders, vendors, folks from regulatory bodies. So I'd like to say thanks for joining us for this webinar. Tangam Systems here to discuss bouncing back from COVID-19 and emerging stronger with your table games. A little bit of the impetus before I kind of get into the agenda. Over the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've had a lot of conversations with industry leaders, CEOs that asked me specific questions about what's going on in Macau during this downtime as they know that the industry reopened. Some other friends and colleagues asked me about what can we do during this pause of business when we're thinking about coming out of this downtime and closures. So we as a company decided to host this webinar, and we might have a few in the next coming weeks. But before we start, for us at Tangam, you know, this is a difficult time for everyone in the industry. Many of us have been in the industry quite some time, and never could we have ever thought that something like this would happen, where basically every casino in the every casino in the world is shut down. From a Tangam's perspective, our hearts and our prayers are out to all of you that are suffering in one way, whether it's yourself, your family, all the team members that you manage. I know one thing about our industry is that we're quite resilient, and you know, when this virus passes us, we'll come back even stronger than we have before. So let's just jump right into it. And for some house cleaning items, if you do have any questions within the Zoom, there's something that says Q&A. We will take all questions in during this time, but we will wait till answer them at the end. So please, as myself and my colleague Adrian go through these steps, who I'll introduce in a moment, type away any questions that you may have, but we're going to leave that to the end to answer them. So on our agenda today, you know, as many of you saw the topic about emerging from COVID-19, there's two main things that we plan to discuss today. And as I mentioned, there may be subsequent webinars in the future weeks. But the two main topics that we're going to discuss today is learnings from Macau. So my colleague and friend Adrian will take that on for us and give us some insight to what Macau has dealt with from closure to reopening and some of the constraints that they have currently. And from those lessons learned, I'll jump into how, as an operator during this downtime, and as you're thinking about reopening, when that day comes, how are you able to reopen? Because as we know, probably not going to reopen the same way that we have in the past. So just by way of introduction, my friend and colleague, Adrian Radford, has over 35 years experience in the industry, worked in Australia and Macau. A couple of properties that you probably know, Crown, Melbourne, and Galaxy, both have casinos that have over 500 tables in them. Was in casino operations for about 35 years, and he joined us about a year ago to help service our clients in Europe and Asia Pacific. Many of the folks on the call I know personally, and for the folks I haven't, I'm Ari Mizrahi. Similar role to Adrian. I help service our clients globally. Prior to working, I've been with Tangam about 3.5 years, but prior to that, I worked in casino operations for a little over 15 years in 5 different jurisdictions across the United States. So both Adrian and I are excited to be on here to share what we've learned about Macau, and then kind of how to deal with that pre-opening kind of roadmap as you guys are thinking about reopening. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Adrian, and he'll walk us through lessons learned from Macau.
Okay, thanks for that intro, Ari, and hello and thank you to everyone that's tuned in today. I'm going to be presenting some lessons from operators and Macau, the government there. I understand that there's quite a few listeners today that operate in the North American market. I will caveat at this stage and say that Macau is a unique gaming jurisdiction. It has a heavy reliance, as we know, on its neighbour China for its success. Some of these measures presented today may or may not be applicable in your jurisdiction. I will say, though, that it appears that Macau government's quick and decisive actions are reflected in the current status of COVID-19 in Macau. So with this first slide, we're just going to provide a bit of information about Macau and the gaming there. Population in Macau currently is around 650,000 people. More pertinent to that is, I guess, that Macau is the most densely populated country in the world, with over 55,000 people per square mile. To give this some context, New York City, as we know, is the largest city in the US, has a population density of about half that at 28,000 per square mile. Macau currently has 41 casinos, in total just over 6,700 tables, around 17,000 slots. Around 90% of those tables are baccarat. In 2019, the total GGR was in the vicinity of 37.7 billion US dollars, and 95% of that came from table games. The win per unit per day in mass is around just north of 10,000 US dollars. The gaming tax in Macau is set at 39%. And again, for more context, in 2019, the gaming tax accounted for around 85% of all taxes collected in Macau. This highlights the critical importance of the gaming industry to the Macau government there. As I said before, Macau is highly dependent on visitors from mainland China. 2019 saw upwards of 39 million visitors enter Macau. More than 27 million, or around 70%, were from mainland China, and a third of those were from Guangdong province, which shares Macau's land border with China. Maybe moving into the next slide, we're going to provide a bit of a timeline of how the Macau government managed the COVID-19 crisis there. And I'll just say that all directives here are mandated or were mandated by the Macau government. So on the 22nd of January, the first case was recorded in Macau. That same day, all casino employees were instructed to wear a mask while at work. From then on, border restrictions commenced, and on February 1st, all casino visitors were also instructed to wear a mask when entering the casino floor. On the 4th of February, all residents were also asked to stay home and told that they must wear a mask in public at all times. On that same day, the casinos were ordered to close for the following 15 days from the 15th of February. From the 5th of February. On the 20th of Feb, casinos reopened, but with restrictions on operations, and we'll come to those in a second. By March the 6th, Macau's recorded a total of only 10 cases of COVID-19, and all have fully recovered. So at this stage, Macau has 0 cases of the virus. But on March 15th, some 40 days after the last one, the first new case is recorded. And this was imported when Macau citizens started returning from overseas, as was the case around the world. The last sort of thing to happen was in last Thursday evening, when the Guangdong province, just the other side of the border to Macau, suddenly imposed a 14-day quarantine on anyone returning from Macau or Hong Kong. Now, this included all returning Chinese citizens. So what this caused Thursday evening was a bit of a rush for those players that were in Macau to try and get across the border, as the deadline was going to be 6 a.m. Friday morning. So in this next slide, we're just going to look at some of the government mandated measures on procedures that were placed on casino operations when they reopened. So at a property level, at this stage, all access points to the property, including staff entry, are security temperature checkpoints. Anyone entering the casino must complete an online health declaration via an app that's been designed on their mobile phone, and they need to do this every day. They basically fill in the declaration, take a screenshot, and if they're moving from casino to casino, they can show this on their phone. Obviously, everyone's still wearing a mask. There's a lot of visible signage around the sanitary best practices. And while the casinos were closed, they all completed a deep clean. So steam cleaning of carpets, all soft furnishings, including table layouts and sanitizing all other surfaces. At a pit level on reopening, you could only open 50% of your tables. So properties were given around 30 days to ramp up to 100%. As part of the social distancing, properties were only allowed to open every other table. So for instance, if you had a pot of 4 tables, you could only open the 2 tables that were diagonally opposite each other. And drilling down to a table level, only 3 players were permitted to sit at each table. So they had to be spaced and all other chairs were removed from the tables. No standing action at all. So only those 3-seater players were allowed to play. And all chips that were used must be sanitized. So at the completion of every round, they had someone there actually sanitizing the chips before they went back into the float. And that's still happening now. There's no eating or drinking at the tables. And there has to be a good supply of hand sanitizer at all open tables and at slot banks. Now, I guess there's going to be a few questions, and I think we're going to wait till the end of the webinar to get those. And I'll hand back to Ari at this stage to continue the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. I appreciate that. And for all of you out there, that this was a lot to absorb. A couple things before we move on. One is, as far as this deck is concerned, we are going to be happy to send this to anyone in the audience. At the end, by the end of the day today or early tomorrow morning, you will receive a survey, and it will ask if you would like a copy of this deck and any of the spreadsheets that I will go into in a few moments. This is free information to anyone. We're here to kind of help in any which way we can. So know that you don't have to scramble for notes or anything like that. We will be happy to send it to you. To wrap up what Adrian was saying before I guess I get into my part, for anyone that's been following Macau and what's going on, this is probably not so much a shock to you. For anyone that might have been following this, and you know, especially I know a lot of the folks in attendance are from the North America, this seems quite extreme. Know that this is mandated by Macau, the gaming board there. And also, what's really important to know about Macau, more than anything else, is almost all of their customers come from either airplane or ferry or drive, and nobody's in their own car. They're busing in from mainland China. So it's a unique jurisdiction in the fact that there aren't really locals that are making up the majority of their business. So they're hyper protective, as Adrian mentioned. 85% of the tax actually comes from gaming there. So why this is a good segue into the next part of our webinar is, from some of the things that we just learned about Adrian and what he was saying, how do you now apply it to kind of your success roadmap, and when you're thinking about reopening, by learning some of the things that Adrian gave us that information on? Because what I do know, or what I do feel is probably accurate, is that it's not going to be business as usual when you first reopen. We're not going to be able to just turn on a switch and reopen as it was the day that you closed. There will be probably some restrictions. But before I move on, there's a couple of hundred people, I think, that are on this webinar. Some of them are our clients. I want to just say something first to our clients before we move on, is that please understand what I'm about to go through is not in replacement of kind of how we service our clients and how you use our software. What I am going to go through in the next 20 to 30 minutes or so is really how we at Tangam and for our clients know this, on how we would address any kind of problem when it comes to forecasting demand. Know that between now and before we reopen, as part of our services and our software, we will be reaching out to you to work within our software on how to come up with that plan. This is more a broad-based solution, as if you didn't use our software, and it's really more how we would approach it, just from a raw data perspective. So I just wanted everybody to know that out there that might be our clients, this is not a replacement of. This is really more for the industry as as a whole to learn about how we would approach forecasting and reopening strategies with what we've been dealt with. So for the remainder of this, I'm going to speak as I was an operator. So many of you that know me, I was in table games operations for quite some time before I came to Tangam. The lens that I am going to look at for the next 20 minutes or so is if I was that department head and as if I was trying to reopen up my own property at this time. So that's kind of the voice that I'll be kind of speaking through. So all of us that are, thinking about how I'm going to reopen, what am I going to do, how am I going to anticipate demand? For me, it always starts with what a goal is, right? And I think that, our industry for the last 5 or 6 years has this exponential growth, right? For all of us, no matter where you are on the globe, there's been a lot of growth, and we've all been able to kind of relish in that. The world changed quite some bit in the last few weeks, and we're anticipating kind of a new norm once we reopen. The property presidents, CEOs, general managers are all going to have some type of goal for us as operators as we reopen. And I'm making some assumptions here just because don't know what goals exactly you may have, but kind of thinking along the lines of what goals would be dealt to me if I was still in operations. I would probably be tasked with maximizing revenue with a limited amount of cost. Why? Because we've been closed and we don't know how long we'll be closed. And there's obviously, you can't reopen as if you did when you were still open. So chances are the goal will be maximize revenue with limited cost. And because of all that growth and all the things that we've been enjoying as an industry, some of the direction I would believe is how do we make up for that lost time, right? We want to hit the ground running, right? We don't want to miss a beat from when we were closed. You as an operator, how are you going to help us achieve those goals? So I think that's going to be probably fairly consistent with all of us that are department heads in table games operations. I'm assuming that some of those goals will be yours once you reopen. But when I think about goals, I think about then constraints and how do I actually get there and achieve those goals. So Adrian mentioned, and he gave us a kind of a lot of knowledge on some regulatory restrictions that Macau has given the casinos there. I am assuming that your governing body or gaming board will give you some minimum requirements to opening, whether it be 3 players max at a table, every other table could be open, you need to take temperature at the entrances. But how some of these restrictions that you might deal with in the first couple of weeks, months, we don't know, you're going to need to think about how do you create a plan based on some of those restrictions. And then depending on how long you're closed, how easy is it to get back those employees, right? That, God forbid or unfortunately we're furloughed or laid off. As you want to reopen, it's not going to be so easy to just get everyone back at once. Hopefully that's the case, but it might not be the case. So how do you deal with some of those constraints when you're thinking about reopening? So when I think about constraints and I think about the goals, then I think about, well, how do I now model that demand? Because at the end of the day, what do we do as casinos in table games? We service guests, we deal hands, we spin balls, whatever the case may be. That's how we that's what we're offering. We're offering hands and service to our guests, to our players. And what you had and what it will be quite different. And you're going to need to model some demand in order to anticipate that. And when I think about at least North America for now, I think about whether you're in a regional market or a destination market. And I think that both of those markets are going to react very differently once casinos reopen, right? So if you're in the Midwest and, the majority of your business comes within 15 radius miles and that state or that jurisdiction, is okay with all the social distancing practices, when you open, at least there won't be a barrier like Macau has with having folks fly in, come on ferries and whatnot. So maybe you may have more demand than a regional or a destination market where the majority of that jurisdiction is coming from airplanes or driving far distances or whatever the case may be. That demand might be quite different. And at the end of the day, it's you as an operator that will have to kind of make those assumptions on how busy will I be compared to how my business was and how do I anticipate that. So for us at Tangam, the way that we think about kind of optimization in table games, this is kind of our lifeblood, the way that we think about it when we're talking to our clients, or if we're talking about table games optimization in general. You know, when we're thinking about it, it starts with your data, right? Obviously, we're a software company that uses the data that casinos already collect to optimize their own business. So it starts with the data that you're collecting, analyzing it, looking for opportunities, and then creating that strategy. And what I'm going to talk through in the next, 10 minutes or so is talking about that strategy in itself. You know, from strategy to execution is sometimes a bridge that is hard to gap in casino ops. Sometimes you have the greatest ideas, but sometimes you can't execute it. But it's really important to go from creation to execution. And then after, as a property, when you execute any strategy, you think about how do you adapt. And typically in table games operations, you're not looking at your business on from adapting to a new strategy on say like a weekly basis. It's just usually just not enough time to make a decision if you made the right schedule or not. I believe, and we believe at Tangam, when you reopen, you're going to have a much, you're going to have to look at how you're managing a business quite often, because it's going to ebb and flow based on the restrictions from the gaming board. It's going to ebb and flow when people are more confident to come back to your property. And you're going to need to react and be fluid, because this is a time for you as an operator to really be agile and make changes in a fairly quickly manner to adjust to your strategies. Where again, typically for us, it's like wait 60, 90, 120 days, then reassess. I think when you guys decide to reopen and create your strategy, you're going to need to look at it again quite quickly just to make sure you make the right decisions and adjust where need be. So really quick on data, I'll jump in it. Once I jump into our spreadsheet, well, I'll kind of explain it more. But again, if you want to look at your own data to forecast demand, here are just some of the data points that you would need. I'm assuming that the majority, or if not all of the folks on the webinar, are using some type of table management system. With all of our clients across the globe, we work with all the bigger vendors that are out there, whether it be Psy Games, IGT, Konami, Aristocrat, Genesis, all those table management systems. These data points are all available to you to use to help forecast demand. What will be critical now is, if you don't have a process in place to forecast demand, is that you're working with your P&A team to really start building some modeling for you. And again, we're going to provide the spreadsheet should you wish to have it. But now is the time to grab some of that historical data to do some modeling. So for anyone that I've talked to over the last 4 years about Tangam, I might sound like a broken record, but as I always say it to our clients or potential clients, I always wish the table games operators should only be held accountable for what they could control. And oftentimes, as an industry, we are sometimes held accountable for what we can't control. So the way when I think about it as 4 yielding levers. We'll concentrate on open hours for our exercise today, but the 4 levers, because game pace is just a byproduct of the 4 yielding levers. So as an operator, what can you control? You can control how many games you have on the floor, house edge or game mix, what games you're going to offer, whether it be 3-2, 6-5 and blackjack, offering side bets, offering progressives, commission baccarat, no commission baccarat, progressives, no progressives, all those things. That's in the full control of the operator. Skip across to your pricing strategy, right? That's kind of the heartbeat of the table games operators. What is my strategy, and how do I yield during different times during the day, and how do I execute that strategy? And then for today's exercise is, what is my open hour strategy, right? I don't know of any casino across the globe that opens all their games 24/7, right? So there is a strategy that has to be in place. And what I've learned over time in my career as an operator and now at Tangam is, when we pull these levers, these yielding levers at the right time, you maximize profit. And that kind of goes along with what I believe some of the goals will be. Maximize revenue with limited cost. So the question is, what levers are you going to pull to maybe achieve some of those goals that you're being tasked with? So with that said, I'm going to jump into the spreadsheet. Again, if you have any questions along the way, please type them into the Q&A piece. Our marketing manager, Alexandra, is kind of facilitating that. And when this is over, I will then either myself or Adrian will answer any questions that you have. So I mentioned the data piece. So this is the raw data that you would need to build a forecast. Again, any table management system that you're using is probably collecting it today, whether you know it or not. What you would need from that table management system that is funneling through into your probably data warehouse that P&A can extract is understanding your table ID, what the game type is, for every given hour, whether the game is open or closed, what the head count or the bodies that you're trying to service at that one moment, right? Again, we deal to customers. So we need to know how many customers are there at any given hour to be able to service that and forecast it out. We'll want to know if the game is empty or not. And then lastly, you'll want to know what the price point is, right? So if you're updating your table minimums in your table management systems, when you're changing your table sign, really good to be able to understand what your pricing strategy is and how is that affecting customer behavior. So all of this raw data, so this is a couple of months of anonymized data. It's not one of our clients. It's really just a lot of made up kind of information in a sense, but the model itself is what's more important. So what we did is we took a couple of months worth of data, just to give you an idea of how much data that is. Even a couple of months of data is about 100,000 rows in Excel, right? So it's not a lot, but you can see every hour of every table generates in it, and this is just a 50 property operation. So the problem is you can't go from this right to forecasting demand, because the one critical piece about understanding your business is, well, what are my targets, right? What am I trying to manage towards? Are you trying to manage to all full tables, which is probably not the case? Are you trying to manage where there's only one player at every table? That's probably not the case. So whether directly or indirectly, all of you as operators are managing to some target, whether you have something set in stone or it's something that's based on gut feel or whatnot. We all manage to some kind of target, because if not, again, all games would be open all of the time. So once this is collected, having a target for every game type. So if we just take blackjack as a use case, for blackjack, the different table minimums that you offer, there's an ideal target that you want to manage towards. And why this is all important is, in order to build a forecast and demand to anticipate that demand, you need to have a target. And you can change it to whatever you want. This is, again, just for example purposes. So once you have the operational data, once you have your targets, what this Excel spreadsheet will allow you to do, and again, we will offer it to anyone that wants it, you will get a demand chart. And I'll spend about a couple of minutes explaining the chart itself, right? So there's all the different game types that you as a casino would have based on that raw data that I showed you. Again, I mentioned it's 2 months of random data from April 2018 to the end of June. So 2 full months or 3 full months of data, different days of the week. And by taking that raw data, this is kind of what the demand chart would look like, and I'll explain it. So the vertical axis is the number of tables that a property can offer. This particular property of this anonymized random data has about 50 tables. And the horizontal axis is the time of day and then the day of the week, right? So you can see anywhere from midnight to midnight, Monday through Sunday. There's 3 data points on each on the chart. I'll start with the light blue mountainous region. So this light blue mountainous region was the ideal tables that you should have had open during that 3-month period of time that I have selected. This gray line were the actual games that you would have had open. So ideal is what you should have had open based on the targets, based on the data that I showed you. The gray line are just the open tables from that raw data. We know when it was open based on that raw data. So now come to what we really wanted to discuss is, well, how do you project, right? So it's easy for you to find out what games were open. It's easy to find out maybe what the ideal tables were at the time. Well, now how do you anticipate the future? How do you anticipate what demand you want to service based on many factors? One is, the restrictions that the gaming board might give me. How many people at a table, every other table, all these potential, or maybe you as a company are going to go above and beyond what the gaming board is asking you to do. Don't know. You guys know that, and you probably know that in due time. So how do you anticipate? How do you take that information? And then the second thing is, how do we, from our full data set of ideal tables, how do you now project? Now that's where you as an operator or a marketing department or a leadership team have to come in and be like, based on grave, day, and swing shift, what do we anticipate coming through the door once we open, right? Now, that is not something that an outside source could really answer. It's something that you as an operator kind of need to think about. Right now, the assumptions, and I'll make the adjustments as we go just to see how the chart itself will change. But some of the assumptions that we made is, here are your core time starts. Grave is 4 a.m., day shift is noon, swing shift is 8 p.m. The adjustment factors that I currently have in there, on Grave, you're going to have 50% business that you had prior from a demand perspective. Day shift will have 70%, and swing shift will have 85%. And that's how this dark blue line is created, right? So this dark blue line represents those adjustment factors compared to your ideal tables of a historical period of time. When we think about this, is the best way to start as you're thinking about reopening, because you knew how busy you were before, you knew what games you had open. Now you have this adjustment factor of how you anticipate demand. Well, what game should I open? So what's interesting to this, before I get to the projected and what games should open, you'll learn very quickly about your own operation. That gray line was the actual games that were open. The ideal what was 100% during this 3-month period. You'll notice here on Tuesdays on day shift, you were probably overspread, right? So you'll learn a little bit about your own business. And on graveyard, you could see during the week, probably severely overspread during these time frames. So even with this quick exercise, you could take a look back of how you were managing your own business back then. But as we move forward, so the question is, well, what should I open? So not knowing maybe what labor constraints you might have or whatnot, in a perfect world, you're going to want to have open, this many games, right? So on Tuesdays, on day shift, you're going to want to have about 20 games open. When you get to swing, you're going to have, 35 games open, right? This is, by using this demand chart, you can then project what games I'll need. You're never going to open just for an hour of service, so you just got to figure out where you can get the biggest bang for our buck. Again, for our clients out there, this is not really for you guys. That's what our software can do. This is really more without having an engine behind it and an optimization tool behind it. Just from a basic level, you're able to see what games you need open. But say you want to filter down to just blackjack, you can easily do so. Say that you only want to look at Friday and Saturdays just to kind of make it easier on your eyes, you will be able to do that. And now let's say, you know what, our jurisdiction is different. This is maybe an optimistic view of the return to business. Say I want to change this to 25%, 50%, and say 65%. Very easily, it just takes a couple of minutes, because all it's doing right now is the sheet is going back to the raw data, looking at the targets, and making an adjustment. You could see how the levels of projected tables have changed, right? So, the $1 million question that you're going to need to answer is, what is my adjustment factor? Because you have the time to anticipate reopening, you as an operator have to decide, what am I shooting for, right? Is it 50% of the patrons coming in? Is it 100% of the patrons? Another thing about the targets is, you'll notice maybe there are some game types that you have that have targets above 3. But as Adrian mentioned, maybe the gaming board may suggest to you or make you never have more than 3 players at any table. Well, that's where you would just simply change your target to 3, refresh the spreadsheet, and it will factor in that the maximum players for $10 roulette is 3, and then the demand and forecasting will actually change for that. So the problem is you don't know what your restrictions you have yet, but you could always go back into something like this and make those adjustments. So with that said, I'll jump back into the deck for a moment, and we'll continue on in the exercise. So So say you went through this exercise, you got work with P&A, they gave you the data that you need, somehow able to help you automate this, whatever the case may be. You forecasted demand. Well, I think the truth is you'll get thrown a lot of curveballs during opening, right? What you thought you were going to open, you couldn't because of maybe labor constraints or not enough people showed up, whatever the case may be. So just some KPIs that we think, right, and how we think about assessing your business as an operator. When I was, the three main KPIs to make decisions on the floor where you drop, win, and hold. Those are all financial KPIs. As an operator, these are things that you indirectly control but don't directly control. By collecting data and by using the data that I mentioned and showed you in that tab, when you want to layer on some of your operational data, the things that you can control, it may give you more informed information to make those adjustments. So from a basic sense, you'll know which games are open and what hours are open during the day. And a byproduct of that is you'll be able to know your win per open hour, which is a great normalization of your data because all your games aren't open 24/7. As you get a little bit more sophisticated in using best practices for your own table management system, hopefully you're updating your table minimums when you're changing the signs on the table. Hopefully you're capturing the majority of the bodies, whether they be head count or rating 100% of your customers with refused name ratings and carded customers. If you're doing that, you could get a sense of your average occupancy. If your supervisors are updating average bet throughout their ratings, you can get a sense of the quality of your customers. And if you're doing all of that, you'll have an idea of what your empty table percentage is. All of this is very important information that will lead you to making more informed decisions as you're thinking about your business. So I'll jump back into the spreadsheet and show the second part. Again, this will all be given to you. So we know you have your operational data, you have your targets. The next piece of information, if you want to marry the two or merge the two, is looking at your financial data, which every casino has. You'll know, all you need to know is your drop and win for each table for each day. So when you have that information, you marry it with your operational data, this is what can happen. And as you now have to kind of duck and jive and change and reassess your business, because what you were planning to do, there's a chance that you might not be able to execute based on so many factors that I just mentioned. So if you have all that information that I suggested, it looks like this. You'll know your game types, your table count, how much win or revenue you were making from those tables, and your win per unit per day. So if you're not rating all of your customers or using head counts, or if you don't know when the games are open, maybe your systems don't allow for it, whatever the case may be, that's probably all the information you would be able to get. As you move to more levels of sophistication with using those best practices with your own table management systems, you can then unlock or peel back the onion to more granularity of your data. So again, as I mentioned, I'll speak through my, as if I was a table games operator, some of the most important pieces of information for me as an operator was what my win per open hour was and what my average occupancy was. And because you're not going to be able to open everything. I think that's pretty fair to say. And you're going to have to kind of adjust as the days go on. So if somebody asked me, what are the games that I definitely need to open first, just in order to make up for that lost time, generate as much revenue as possible that's in alignment with the guest experience, some people will be like, well, I just want to open up the games that have the highest win per unit per days, or, the highest win per open hours. And I think that you need to look at that, but also look at occupancy. So if I was asked, what games have to open first, I would think of games like roulette, because they have a high win per open hour compared to any of their peers. They also have the highest occupancy. This is all using historical data. And they have one of the lowest empty table percentages. I'll also think about opening up Blackjack Plus. That's in a similar story. Pontoon has the highest win per open hour and kind of middle of the road in occupancy. I'll also notice that there's a game like Stud Poker that has a very high, or the second highest win per open hour. My concern for a game like this during these uncertain times is that historically it wasn't that busy and it sat dead 28% of the time. So if we know that we're going to come into this with maybe not as much demand and a game that wasn't so popular, this is a cause for concern. I wouldn't count on this kind of revenue. only because of these two pieces of information that the data that you've already collected is telling you. Now, some people might say, well, garbage in, garbage out. All of this is going to be relative to each other. So whether if it's exactly 1.7 occupancy and exactly a 28% empty table percentage, it's going to be relative to all your other game types. And that's what you're looking for, is that relations between all your other game types. There's a game here like deal poker that, is in the middle of the road of popularity, kind of sits empty a lot, and really just doesn't earn a lot of money. When you're thinking about your operators on the floor, they adjust their game spreads based on what they see, bodies that they could service. And there's going to be some games out there that just don't pay their rent. And at this time of uncertainty and this time of, getting the most out of the labor hours that you're putting to the floor, because you're going to have, you're going to have so many restrictions, you would want to look at your data this way to come up with a plan when you are forecasting that demand. I'll jump back to the deck itself. So just, again, to be ready to adapt to all this, and I think this is one of the most important messages, is adapting and being agile once you reopen, is think about the data collection that we talked about. Think about your own business and how you collect it. Are you using your vendors' table management systems to the best of their abilities? There's best practices out there. We're happy to share them. If you care about data in the way that I just presented it, make sure that your team on the floor is collecting it, at least moving forward, right? You can't fix the past, but you could fix, you could work towards a better future. Work with your P&A team to merge that operational and financial KPIs. You can't make decisions only in financials, and you can't make decisions only on your operational KPIs. Ideally, you would want to merge the two. Creating that strategy. Oftentimes, in my old days, I would ask somebody from P&A for a report. I would get it a few days later. What I asked for is not what I really meant to ask for, and then I would need them to go back. It would take 2 or 3 or 4 days later. Now that you have this downtime, work with your P&A team to have the right reports that you need based on the operational and financial data that you're collecting, so you can adapt very quickly. You shouldn't wait for that back and forth between you and your P&A department. Definitely now is the time. The first course of business is to open for your spreads, and what is that pricing strategy? The reason why I mentioned pricing here is, if you're going to have such a limited amount of supply that you could open, are you going to open up all your games at the bottom tier? Well, if that's the case, you're probably not going to be able to make up for that lost time. So you have to find, as an operator, that healthy balance of what your pricing strategy is going to be, because realistically, it's going to probably it's going to have to be different than what it was. I'm not saying that you should price all your games high or price all your games low. You as an operator know what you need to do, but it probably can't be exactly the same based on some of these restrictions that you're going to have. I would say for future webinars, but something really to think about for all of you. I hope there isn't a lot of time until you reopen, but there is going to be some period of time. Now's the time, right? I always said, as an operator, I made all those excuses. There's not enough time to reassess the business. I'm putting out fires. If you're a table games leader, you have hundreds, if not thousands, of employees, and we all have always made that excuse to not have the time to take a step back and reassess our floor layout, reassess our game mix. What is working? What is not working, right? The vendor world has so many different game types to offer to you today. And some things work and some things don't, but it's really up to you as an operator to reassess it. Are there games that are clustered together that made sense historically? Is now the time to do some tabletop changes? I had a lot of long discussions with a lot of friends of mine in the industry, and that's one of the topics is like, man, the silver lining for this is you're kind of able to reopen your property, but you have all this valuable information of data, where if you were fortunate, and I was, to open a few properties in my career, you're kind of going into it a little bit dark, right? You're putting a bunch of game types out there. You're probably bringing games from a jurisdiction that you came from. What worked for you somewhere else might not work there, but you have to collect data and then reassess it. Now you kind of have this pause in your operation. And again, my silver lining is you can now reflect. Did the progressives you have on the table work, or did they not? Do adjustments need to be made? The side bets you have, did they work, did they not? Right? Where the games are located, now's the time. And the last piece, which is really near and dear to my heart, when I was at Parks and I was responsible for table games there before I left to come to Tangam, I used to think of our pit managers or floor managers as revenue managers. And where I failed back then as an operator was I didn't give them enough of the financial information that they needed to make informed decisions. As I mentioned earlier, they manage with their eyes and their hearts and their ears and what they've learned in history to offer the right games at the right times, at the right prices. But oftentimes they don't know how much the games are actually making. I would say that on some of the information I showed you, as you're expecting your management team on the floor to make adjustments, give them that information. It's valuable. Should they open up that deal poker game that only made $78 an hour versus the Pontoon that made $270? Now's the time to reassess. Are we empowering our staff on the floor that I consider revenue managers, right? Those are the ones that are pulling those yielding strings in yield time. They're the ones that are making up the differences throughout the day. There's such a big, and when you think about all the staff in our industry, they're such an important part. And sometimes, and again, where I failed along the way in certain respects is I didn't empower them with enough information. And I implore you to do that if you're able to. So at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and grab some of the questions. And like I said, either myself or Adrian will answer them. So just give me one moment.
So, Ari, I think I've got one of the first questions. While you're getting to the question screen there, I've got one of the first questions here that came in. Yeah, there we go. So the first question was some details around how chip sanitizing, how are they doing it every round and what's happening at the rack. So basically they're dealing the hand, chips in play. At the end of the hand, what they're using is one of the clear Perspex card vaults that we use on baccarat tables. Basically, they gather all the chips that have been used in that round, place them in this transparent vault. Depending on what type of chips you use, obviously if they're RFID enabled, you don't want to be dipping chips in solution. If they are, they're using sanitary wipes to wipe these chips, all of the chips, and then placing these chips back in the float. Due to the volume of business and the social distancing measures that are happening there right now, they have a surplus of staff to be able to manage this process. Moving forward, depending on how long that goes, I guess that gets a little bit harder, but right now they're managing that with the resources they have. In terms of the second question here, how are the regulators enforcing the no back betting, and insights into how this is changing the experience for baccarat players given the culture? I guess to the first one, when they first reopened, I mean, business levels weren't huge when these casinos reopened. They were only looking at between 10 and 20% of pre-virus numbers on the floor. And there was a heavy presence of the governing body over there is called the DICJ. This is the gaming organisation over there. They did have a heavy presence on the floors, and they were taking some quite stringent action against the operators initially, just to make a statement, I guess. So they had a lot of the operation managers off the floor filling in lengthy reports as to why we let things happen, like letting someone backbet or too many players at the table, etc. And I think in some instances, if there was a sort of multiple sort of occurrences of this, probably they're actually penalising properties by closing further tables or shutting down slot machines as suggested punishment for breaching those regulations. In terms of the experience, the baccarat players, I guess, as we know, they love playing in groups. I guess I can't speak too much to this. You can't let it happen. You can only have these 3 players to a table. So I guess it's just the new normal that they need to get used to. Ari.
Yes, great. Second question we got, when it's time for casinos to open back up with the limitations, is it necessarily a bad time to introduce new games to customers, or is it a prime time to introduce new games? Really good question. This is I would say for me personally, I think the answer is yes, right? So if you were thinking about refreshing your floor over time, and there are some games out there, or there might be vendors on this call that would want to sell you to maybe some of these new derivatives that are out there. My short answer is yes. I would say the caveat to all this is your gaming board going to approve it? So if it's a game that's already approved in your jurisdiction, that's something that you probably don't need to worry about. The second part is, are you going to be able to train your staff on this new game type? So for me, the answer is emphatically yes. If you're able to surpass those two kind of hurdles, is will the gaming board approve it before you open? And second is, will you be able to train your staff on it? Because, there is, to talk about North America, our table games business has evolved immensely since the 80s and 90s to where we are today, with many, the gambler themselves has changed in what they like to play and what they don't like to play. There's a lot of great products out there, and what better time from a marketing and perspective and kind of refreshing the floor is to offer that new game type. There's a lot of valuable information on how these games. I would ask you to probably reach out to any of your colleagues and see how that game was performing and whatnot. But I guess the short answer is yes, absolutely. Next question, would you recommend? I don't know, Adrian, I guess maybe this is good for you to take, at least from a Macau perspective.
I guess from a Macau perspective, yeah, which operational procedures would you recommend, even if they are not mandated? Look, I guess from a CSR, a corporate social responsibility standpoint, you should probably think about or prepare for this, or sort of some social distancing within your floor. To what extreme? I guess that's dependent on your jurisdiction and yourselves as a company in terms of how far you want to take that. But and depending on when the casinos reopen, wherever you are in the world, as to to what extent you want to take those measures. But certainly distancing people in the initial opening phase, I think, would be sensible at this stage. You could go a lot further, obviously, but at a minimum, I would probably look at that aspect.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The one thing that I would think about as well, and I guess I forgot to mention it, in Macau today, even though these are large, extremely big casinos, today, for protective measures, they require everyone to hit the casino floor to go through a metal detector. That's just part of the world in Macau and a lot of Asia Pacific. They're able to actually manage people coming through onto the casino floor because of that obstacle today. When I think about casinos like Las Vegas that are quite porous, some of those casinos have no doors from the outside, have no locks from the outside. I think that's something, not necessarily what I would do above and beyond, but if I'm an operator that has quite porous entrances, and then you're probably already thinking about it, but if you're not, it's something to consider, because, with the social distancing measures that, you may want to consider, even if the gaming board doesn't require you to, how are you able to funnel guests onto your gaming floor? So,
good point.
Is the model you presented built in Excel? Yes, it is built in Excel, and as I mentioned earlier, after you'll get a survey, and then either by the end of the day or tomorrow morning, in that survey, a question will be, would you like the Excel file? If you click yes, our marketing manager, Alexander, will make sure that you get it as quickly as possible. And that's it for the questions that we got. So again, you will receive a survey either later today or early.
There are a couple of more questions.
Couple more questions? No worries.
Oh, okay. Well, hold on one second then.
I'll jump in here. I think I saw another question from someone regarding.
I got it, Adrian.
Okay.
So what are your thoughts on hands per hour given social distancing, more so in terms of calculating projected revenues to build forecast models? Yeah, so actually, excellent question. So the way that we think about it at Tangam is that every occupancy level will and this is everything that everyone knows as an operator, right? Whether you have a blackjack game that's heads up versus being full, you're going to expect a different amount of rounds per hour based on that occupancy level. So obviously, the less players, the more rounds per hour, and our models are built off of that occupancy number. So it kind of works itself out that way. So I think maybe the question, and I might try to read between the lines, is what is your, when you're thinking about players calculation, I know that in these table management systems, you have a static rounds per hour. I could speak of my experience in the past. Blackjack might have been set at 50 or all the way up to 75 hands per hour, but that's usually if the game is full or very close to full. If the maximum amount of hands is, or maximum amount of players at a table is 3, that's roughly, I don't know, 90 to 100 hands per hour, give or take, depending on your situation, your dealers, whatever the case may be. When you're thinking about player calculations, because I think something that marketing will be really interested to understand is the player value, right? So you might have to make those adjustments in a short period of time in your back-end systems to adjust for that maximum of 3 at a table. Next question. I guess Adrian will let you take it.
Okay, mentioned that between 10 and 20% of players returning at reopening in Macau. Any update on the most recent numbers? It's a good question. There was actually some growth. Looking through 4 weeks, talking to operators over there, there was some steady growth, even though it was a small sort of growth. We're getting to around the mid-20s in terms of on pre-opening numbers. But with what happened last Friday when Guangdong province brought in that new 14-day quarantine, the players that were in Macau actually just made it for the border, and properties at the moment are pretty much empty, unfortunately. To give an example, on Saturday, I think one of the operators had a peak headcount of 20 people for the day, with around 100 tables open. So things are a little bit grim over there at the moment, and obviously they need the borders to open up. They need the visas to come back online. And a lot of the operators are anticipating that once this happens, and there's going to be a lot of sort of pent-up demand. There's going to be a big surge once that happens. Okay. Any special measures for dealers? What safety procedures does the casino have for employees and providers? I'll address this again from a Macau perspective, I guess, as well as sensible sanitation, washing your hands, etc. Everyone's still using a face mask, so everyone must wear a face mask. I know that back of house, they're also following these guidelines. So in the staff dining rooms, there's only one entry and exit point that is security monitored with, again, screening for temperature checks. The staff dining room is, the seating has been spaced in the dining room also. So there's a lot of measures happening back of house as well as front of house in terms of safety measures for employees.
Now, let's say another question came in. It says, do you have any recommendation in terms of cost mitigation to prevent margin erosion on reopening? Yeah, I mean, that's a great question that I'm sure CEO might be asking you in a sense, or if you're anticipating answering that question yourself, right? Yeah, I mean, I think this is where you have the opportunity to reassess, with a fine-tooth comb your business. Take a look at all the games that you provide on the floor, as many of you know, and not really to speak too much about the vendor world, but a lot of these vendors are offering newer deals in the past couple of years when it comes to site licenses and where can you take advantage of some of those things, reassess, how many games people are watching, never giving up game protection or anything like that. But, now is the time, because you have that next couple of weeks, whatever the case may be, to really take a look under the hood, as I like to say it, and see where you can do it. But I would really, take a look at the costs that you're spending and seeing if there's any potential waste that's been there, any reassessment. I think, as we all believe, that there will be a lot of unmet demand in a short period of time. So I wouldn't want to, scale back too much in your offerings just to save, some of, they always say penny wise, dollar foolish. But, again, because we spend so much time putting out fires as an industry, now's a good time to reassess your own business. I don't know if Adrian, you have anything to add there.
No, I would agree with you, Ari. Yes, 100%.
Just going to check to see if we have any more questions. And we'll wrap it up if we don't. So just give me one moment, folks. Looks like there's one more. I'll display it and I'll show it. Just 1 second, folks. And I'll read it out loud. So given the information we have heard often in the media recently that the virus and other pathogens are able to stay alive on different materials at different time frames, maybe it's the materials like gaming chips and other gaming equipment or manufacturers should proactively use this information. There are new technologies where special surface coating can kill most bacteria and viruses on contact. This might help to bring more confidence to future patrons and eliminate some of those concerns. And I think that what Adrian was mentioning is that, yeah, I mean, you want to be proactive with that. I mean, the one thing is, your players, your guests, may be apprehensive as they come through. I know in my where I last worked in operations, we did clean chips. Now's the time to do it and tell all your customers you have. I know that, having signage up there with some of your measures will bring more confidence to your customers or your guests to where they feel confident. Adrian, again, I don't know if you have anything else to add with that.
No, I would agree. I think like many things that are happening right now, people are looking for alternative technologies to operate better. Do we go to a chipless scenario? Is there a solution where we don't use chips at all? There's a lot of ideas out there. It's whether you can bring them to market and make them work, I guess.
Right. Well, thank you, Adrian, for that. So as a quick wrap up, I know we're a couple of minutes over. Again, you will be getting a survey if you want both the deck and the spreadsheet. Our marketing manager will send that off to you as long as you submit that you want it. Again, if you have any questions for us at Tangam, info@tangamgaming.com. I actually get these directly, so I'll be happy to answer anything within the next 24 to 48 hours. If you have any other questions for our clients, again, we will be reaching out to you prior to opening to help you devise your plan. But for anyone else that has any questions about the spreadsheet or the deck, feel free to message us. We're happy to help. I want to thank everyone from across the globe that took the time out of their day. Some woke up as early as 4 a.m. to make this call. We appreciate it, and we look forward to potential future webinars to talk about other topics. Thank you.
Thank you.